Howdy everybody, this is erotema. Welcome to my review of Brotato. For the second video review of my channel, I wanted to focus on something that I was particularly fond of. Originally I had plans to write up a review for Skate, and I'd really like to cover Roguelike's Pit as well, but I figured I'd do something that was a little more near and dear to me. So over the past year, aside from playing Halo Infinite all the time, I've played a lot of roguelikes. You might remember that I published a review of Dead Link earlier in the year, but I've played a lot of other games like Mullet Mad Jack. I was a really big fan of that one. It's probably the most cerebral game I've ever played in my life, and it's really intense. I've also played a lot of RoboQuest, Gunfire Reborn, and several other different roguelikes that I've had just installed on my Xbox and just kind of been poking away at them for a while. Earlier this year, I picked up Dead Zone Rogue. I really enjoyed that. I played Deep Rock Galactic Survivor, Roguelike's Pit, as I mentioned before. Lots of Have a Nice Death, lots of Neon Abyss, some Dead Cells here and there. I even played some Hades, even though I didn't play Hades 2, and I played the crap out of Poke Rogue this summer. But in between all of those games, the one I kept coming back to was Brotato, and I do think is the best roguelike, or it's at least my favorite one of all time, and I'm here to tell you why. With the intro out of the way, I'll say that Brotato has some of the most content of any roguelike that I've ever played. Just take a look at this character selection screen. All of those options are different characters that you can use in the game, all of which have their own different stats and build varieties. There are actually 39 stats with 17 primary and 22 secondary stats. Each of these help you make your build. There's also 78 weapons, with 17 different weapon classes, almost 200 unique items, and 6 different difficulty settings to play the game on. It's pretty safe to say that every single time you pick up and play Brotato, you can play something different with all the different characters and different weapon choices you can do, and different builds, different synergies, and so on. Each wave starts off with you choosing your character, your starting weapon, and the difficulty you'd like to play on, and then from there you go straight into the waves. Brotato is a game where there are 20 waves, and they're broken up by a brief intermission between each wave. Now, starting out, the waves will only be about 20 seconds long, but with each passing wave, the time gets a lot longer, and each of those seconds really starts to add on and starts to feel like forever whenever you're really in the thick of things and trying to survive. Now, like any roguelike, when you're starting out, you just try to get a feel for whatever build you're using and see what kind of things your character is good at. Between waves, you'll be able to use points from leveling up to acquire more stats, and also use materials that you've gathered to buy things within the shop. A lot of these items in the shop will help you along the way. Of course, there's great new weapons and stuff to find, and you can combine weapons that you already have to make them stronger. But of course, it's also possible to really screw yourself if you're not careful, because a lot of the different items have negative impacts on your character as well. So as a result, you really need to take your time and take a breather in between stages and these intermissions so that you don't accidentally buy stats or items that you don't really need for your character and end up wasting time. The great thing is these intermissions don't have any time limit, so you can sit here just trying to figure out exactly what you want for as long as you want. The other thing that's really nice is just in case you find something that you can't exactly afford at the moment, you can re-roll the shop, or you can lock items to buy later whenever you do have the cash for them. I'm actually embarrassed to admit that I played Brotato for dozens of hours before I realized the lock feature was a thing, and so I made the game a lot harder for myself for quite a while, but now that I know about it, it kind of makes the game almost trivial compared to how it used to feel. In the first half dozen waves or so, it's definitely the time to kind of figure out your character, make adjustments, and adapt to the game's random elements so that you can make sure that you're picking up stats and weapons that are actually useful for yourself. It's easy to kind of get lost in the sauce and forget exactly what you're doing with your build. It really doesn't take long before Brotato starts to ramp it up on the whole power fantasy situation and making you feel extremely powerful. But by wave 10 or so, you'll be facing larger hordes of enemies. By this point, you can usually tell if your build is kind of coming together or if it's falling apart at the seams. The great thing is that at no point does Brotato ever really feel like it's just losing the balance between player skill and random luck. But roughly this point in the game is when the enemy damage scaling really starts to kick up, and they'll start to do a lot more damage to you if you don't have the right kind of stats. And by right kind of stats, I mean that every character has some affinities towards certain stats and away from certain stats. For example, some characters are built more for dodging rather than speed or defense. Around this point in the game, you're usually starting to find tier 2 and tier 3 weapons in the shop that'll make your character a lot stronger and scale up a lot against the bosses and other harder enemies in the game. But roughly around wave 15, you'll find your first elite. It usually is a small boss character that you'll have to fight. They're usually also surrounded by a whole bunch of enemies, and they fire off a ton of projectiles and do these dashing attacks that are extremely hard to dodge once you start getting surrounded by a lot of guys. It's easy to just kind of bump into enemies on accident if you're not careful, and that'll definitely happen. Unfortunately, when death does come, it's always a bit of a kick in the gut, but when you finally make it through, it's really satisfying, let me tell you. It's especially satisfying when you can beat the game on the hardest setting. I'll let my first Danger 5 clear speak for itself. Keep in mind that I had been trying to clear this Danger 5 run for about a week straight. For this run, I was actually using my main, the Cyborg, which comes pre-equipped with a chain gun. pretty handy for the start of the game. The guy's weapon damage scales all weird with engineering, so you need to use weapons like the wrench so that you can spawn a bunch of turrets, and the engineering strength boosts the turrets. This was actually the first run that I tried to do something like this, where I had a whole bunch of the wrenches rather than a bunch of ranged weapons, and it was kind of incredible how well it actually worked, and just kind of made me feel like I should have stopped and paid attention a little bit more to my character's strengths and weaknesses, but I digress. Victory was precious indeed.
Yes! Oh my god, I did it! Fuck yes!
I promise it's a lot harder than it looks. But the bliss of ending a successful run is truly incredible. It just makes you want to jump into the next one. Of course, trying something new is always really interesting in the game as well. As I said before, the variation in builds in this game is kind of insane. For example, this build here is a character that has up to 24 weapons at all times, and you do get a particular bonus if you use the stick weapons. So I just equipped myself with a whole bunch of sticks, and man, did that do the trick. This was a very OP run. In fact, I would say this is one of the runs I felt the most actually untouchable as I was kind of coming up to the end of Wave 20. This elite enemy here just doesn't even stand a chance. Now, finishing a run with a character for the first time will usually reward you with some kind of progress-based reward, which is really cool. All of the stuff in this game is locked behind progress, not money. Well, there is DLC, but I'll get to that in a minute. Considering the fact that Brotato costs just $5, it's kind of insane how much you feel rewarded while you play the game and how often you do. It's like you get so much value out of such a small package. And sure, it may look kind of repetitive, but I can say that after dozens and dozens of hours of playing this game that I'm still not tired of it even the slightest bit. Once my skills started to kind of grow, I really liked going back through with different potatoes and trying to do Danger 5 clears with them just to see what I could do. Testing out each character and different weapons, different builds, different stat distributions, things like that. It was definitely really interesting. And like I said, even though it looks a little repetitive, all the different builds and all the different variety of the game just kind of keeps it from ever getting too stale. I'm coming up on about 100 hours of recorded time on my Xbox, so I think I can speak for that. This game is peak. I'd like to conclude this review by mentioning that Brotato is usually on sale for no more than $5 or so on whatever shop you usually use, whether it's Xbox, PlayStation, or Steam, or the Switch. It's also got the Abyssal Terrors DLC for a couple extra dollars. The DLC adds a couple characters, weapons, items, and even a stage called the Abyss. Even more recently, the developers actually put out a free update called the New Dawn Update, which adds 6 new items and a new weapon. So even a couple years after the game came out, it's still getting some updates. So for my closing comments, I just kind of want to touch on a couple particular things about Brotato that really stand out to me. As I mentioned before, the idea of having just choices all around you all the time is something that the game excels at. It really makes you feel like you're in control even when you're not in control, and when the game is getting increasingly out of control. I really appreciate this. A lot of roguelikes just kind of throw you up against the wall and you don't always have, a good answer. And at the very least, this game finds a nice midsection between feeling like you're lucky sometimes and feeling like it's all down to player skill that you survived. I appreciate that the game is somewhat cryptic about all of its different stats, attributes, weapons, and different things that, contribute to the mechanics. You kind of have to play the game to figure it out, and that makes it a lot of fun to discover everything that the game has to offer. Like, who would have known that I would have loved running a build that had nothing but sticks? It's also just very adjustable, so if you don't want a particularly huge challenge, you can turn down things like the damage, the enemy speed, everything like that in the options menu. But as far as I'm concerned, the only thing that I really want to do is just turn that difficulty all the way up to Danger 5, pick a new Brotato, and go through the game with every character that I possibly can until I've got them all done. And so there you have it, guys. That is my review of Brotato. I would say it is peeled to perfection. 5 stars out of 5. This is my favorite roguelike and game and indie game that I've found in quite a while, and I'd highly suggest it to anybody who's interested in this kind of game. It's incredible. Thank you so much for checking out my review. I hope that you'll come around and check out more of them later. I'm hoping to have a ball pit and skate review posted soon, but until then, don't forget to check out my Dead Link review if you haven't seen it. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Drink some water, and tell somebody something nice. Say a little prayer to RNGesus. Go play some Brotato. That's what I'm doing. Erotema out. Later, y'all.